What we're going to do over the next few videos is start looking at different body types and looking at how, instead of reinventing the wheel each time and memorizing a muscular body type and a skinny body type and a fat body type and whatever else, is we just need to go, do you know what? The same concepts still apply. We just construct our materials in a slightly different way. So let's turn this guy into a much more muscular sort of character. So obviously I want to add more muscle, right? But the secret to getting a muscular body type working is not in the muscle, it's in the bone, because the bone has the opposite characteristic of the muscle. Not completely opposite, but the muscle is creates rounded forms and the bone creates flat, sharp forms. So here, as I'm building the muscle, I'm conscious to leave the bone behind. The other thing that I need to study is the tendon, because as the muscle grows, the tendon, which is what is binding the muscle to the bone, doesn't grow anywhere near as much. The tendon still grows, but just not the same amount as the muscle does. So as I'm building all of this up, I don't allow it to move in terms of where it begins and finishes. So for example, the obliques, which are covering this whole area, I've just circled there the thick part, but in this guy, because he's muscular, these parts will start to thicken up as well. They turn to tendon through here. This area is all tendon, so the muscle is not going to move. It's going to stay exactly where it is. It's just going to start to become larger and more defined. But the transition to the tendon is going to become more abrupt because the muscle starts to grow much more than the tendon does. So then one of the key things that I want to look for in the muscular body type is the transition to tendon and the transition to bone. And here we can really start to appreciate the importance of bony landmarks, because a bony landmark is an area of bone that can never be covered by muscle. So here's a good one. This is the scapula, right? The scapula, if we could see underneath his skin, would look something like this. And this portion isn't a bony landmark, even though it impacts the form a lot, but it's covered by the trapezius. So as this guy is now going to the gym and working his trapezius 5 times a week, this starts to become bigger and bigger and more developed, as does the muscle underneath, which is the rhomboid. Here, this is trapezius, supraspinatus and levator scapulae, if you want to get super nerdy about it. But you know, that kind of knowledge is not going to make your sculpts any better. The important thing, and the thing that will make your sculpts better, is understanding that the bone stays exactly where it is. So now what we're looking at, and this area is I think a really key one to understand how we depict muscle on the body, because if you look at the trapezius in an anatomy book, you see this kite shape, right? We saw this in the previous video, or we touched on it. But then when you look at it in detail, you go, well, actually, this bottom section here is tendon, this section here is tendon, this section here is tendon, and that becomes really important because as the muscle transitions to tendon, these movements become sharp and abrupt. And these sharp movements are great opportunities for us to find a little bit of that salt to pull out the flavors of the rest of the sculpt. So here in this area, we've got bone, this bone of the scapula, so it doesn't matter how muscular he gets, you prod your finger on him there, it's not a nice massage, you're still prodding bone, right? And then here, this is tendon. So this is muscle turning to tendon, which when the muscle is large, which in this case it is, becomes a sharp movement. And then down here, muscle turns to tendon again through there. So that gives us another sharp movement. But you can see as I'm looking to make this muscle bigger, I'm still not just carving everything in. Right? I do quite a bit of carving as I sculpt, but that's only to map out the forms. So for example, here, teres major, here, serratus, this muscle. This is a muscle you should really study. It comes underneath the latissimus and then gives us these fingers that we were looking at in the last video. Through there, on the side of the body, serratus, latissimus going over the top there, teres minor, infraspinatus with deltoid going over the top. So the point being is maybe yes, I'll draw all of this stuff, but I don't hold on to those drawings. Even if I want someone to feel really muscular, I still have to let them be covered by skin. So that's where I smooth it out. And then I might find them again and smooth it out, and I just keep on going backwards and forwards however many times. These big muscles of the back, they're very important to us in terms of our day-to-day existence because they are pulling our whole body upright. They're very, very big muscles. In this case, I'm just allowing them to grow even more on him. So now maybe I start to find a bit of the latissimus, but it's a muscle I'm very suspicious about because just what's more important is the forms underneath. This again is the serratus mass. It's a muscle that I said you really need to spend some time studying, because if you want a wide section to the middle of your body, this is the muscle you want to work more than your lats, because this is what makes the body wider and wider through here, and the lats sit on top of that. Lats giving us a thick ropey cord through here. But you can see I'm just revisiting all the forms that we've looked at already, but in this case giving them more mass, but as I do, always holding on to the bone. The bone always needs to be in the same place. I mean, what you might find is that, for example, if his shoulders got really big, if this trapezius muscle got really big and the guy was really tense, the natural tension in the trapezius would start to bring the shoulders up. So you see this quite a lot in big guys. Or not just big guys, just tense people in general, which is probably the majority of us. The shoulders start to come up. Now and again, you'll see like a big guy who also does yoga, and their clavicles will be much more horizontal or even go down. So in this way, of course, the muscles can start to affect the bone, but for the most part, the bone stays exactly where it is, regardless of how big the muscles are. Notice I'm still allowing the pecs to just be a big, smooth area. At some point I will go in and I'll put in some more detail there. But it's still important, whatever the body type is, that we find these areas of where the eye can just rest, You don't need activity everywhere, and in fact, if you find activity everywhere, then you're going to end up with a very difficult piece to look at. It's going to be kind of stressful to look at. You need to find tension points and relaxation points. I'm talking about visual tension. So where there's sharp movements, that gives you visual tension. Where there's not, that gives you visual relaxation, and you need both, regardless of whether the body itself is tense or not. These forms that I'm looking at around the hips, this would be a muscle called the tens fasciae latae. This would be gluteus medius. This would be gluteus maximus. I basically look at that like a thumb. That's the thumbnail. And then here are the fingers. So this is a hand. And this is, in the middle, a slice of pizza. So I have a hand grabbing a slice of pizza. Point being is that when you want to try and memorize these forms, making cute little visual things, if your brain works in that way, can be very, very useful. Stephen Rogers Peck has a book called, I believe, Atlas of Anatomy for the Artist. And he has a lot of very cute, nice ways of remembering the form. So definitely recommend that if it works for you. The key thing that you'll realize is there is no right way to study the body. It's just you need to figure out what works for you. Using the damp standard brush to carve in to get what has now become a depression, but it's a depression not because the bone has moved, that's why I'm cheating it as I carve it in, but because the muscle has grown around the bone. the top of the lats. Lats turning to tendon through here. So if you study the lats, you'll see they cover this whole area, but this is tendon. Any place where a muscle turns to tendon becomes very important for us when we're working with muscular body types. Not so important on the lats, like I say, not an important muscle. But in general, anytime when a muscle turns to tendon, which you can see the abs are doing all over the place, because they have these tendinous bands, that becomes important. Now switching out of symmetry, because there's no way I'm going to achieve naturalism whilst working symmetrically. And you'll notice that these tendinous bands in real life, sometimes they're just like an inch higher or an inch lower or whatever. They really vary. And what that starts to teach you is actually bodies are just constructed differently. There's no rules to this stuff. That's why instead of rules, you want to work off of concepts, ideas, ways of thinking. That's pretty much what this whole course is about. You can start to find these kind of little knots of muscle bundle from the obliques when the obliques get very, very large. You can see a lot of creature artists really like to play with this, but with the obliques, you just got to be super careful with that muscle, because the pattern of these kind of bands that come up is such a clear repeating pattern, and if you find any obvious repeating pattern in the body, it's never going to feel natural. Same thing with these fingers of the serratus. You just need to find ways to break it. What makes each one different from the other? I could tell you, maybe I will if you're good, but the point is not that I should tell you, but more that you should look for it yourself. Okay, you've been good, I'll tell you. Basically, these all point to the bottom of the scapula, meaning that each one of these has a different angle. They actually come right the way up the body, and if he had his arms raised, you might see some at the top. They have a downwards angle, the bottom they have an upwards angle, and if you find the nipple, bunk, then you come just behind that and take a curve, and they sit pretty much on a curve, so they don't finish on a straight line. So that's one thing that makes them each one different to the other. But also I would just find a little bit more tension in some, a little bit less in others. Just allow a natural bit of chaos to bleed into your forms. Nature is a constant battle between order and chaos, and so your work really needs to reflect that if it's going to feel naturalistic. And I'm still conscious that the obliques are flatter than the serratus, so I still have that contrast. But as the obliques get more muscular, I'm not able to find as much ribs underneath, because these ribs aren't true bony landmark. They're covered by this muscle, meaning they'll start to disappear as the muscle gets more developed. But an area like this, that is true bony landmark, so you can't hide that with muscle. Same as the bottom of the sternum there. So here as the muscle transitions to the bone, that could give us a very sharp movement. And here's an unexpected detail. Remember I was talking about that in the last video, an unexpected detail being what I call details that you won't necessarily find in anatomy books, but that you see when you look in life carefully enough. And so the pecs are made up of all these different triangles, right? And they kind of twist around. And in a lot of us, this top triangle is the most dominant one, but that grabs hold of the sternum. But what I noticed in very muscular people, and I don't know the reason for this, but often this second one here is the most dominant. So you get this feeling of like a band cutting across there. It's not a thing that you'll see in everyone, but it's just one of those things that I noticed and thought, yeah, that's a nice unexpected detail. I'm going to take that. Your temptation would be to just make each one of these triangles the same kind of strength, and that's going to feel very unnatural. It's too much order and not enough chaos. So finding that balance, always important. This is an interesting area. This whole bottom area of the hips is very, very difficult to study. Basically, we have the bone here. We have this ligament through there. And then if you look at this in an anatomy book, you'll see that's tendon. And you'll notice me saying, if you look at this in an anatomy book, quite a lot, because anatomy books are great. But they'll screw you. They won't tell you everything. And so here what's happening is, like, you would need to pull the top layer of muscle off, pull the abs off, pull the obliques off. And then what you would see is a deeper layer of muscle, the internal obliques, along with other things, the transversus abdominis and God knows what else. And that can all start to become quite developed and quite strong. And so that gives this kind of fullness here. I look at that as a kind of downward pointing claw. Again, any time when you can find a shape conception to help a shape stick, then very, very useful. Have these veins that we often see on the bottom here coming up. Here, brachiocephalic vein. With veins in general, you don't need to be, you don't need to study them in any real detail, but there are a few that you can't just make up. So this brachiocephalic vein is one of them. Something like the external jugular vein running down there would be another. But veins on the back of the arms or on the feet or whatever, you just create some squiggles and get you close enough. And on these sorts of body types, when they're really pumped, you do get these sorts of veins. And yeah, accuracy. Well, in anatomy in general, for artists, accuracy isn't the thing. It's capturing the character of the thing. So so then when I'm working with veins, these veins specifically, I'm going, okay, the character is kind of wiggly but also knotted, right? Like it's heavier in bits, comes and goes like that. Whereas the character of a vein like this is it's just quite rounded and quite simple and smooth. So always thinking about the character of what it is you're creating. And that's the same whatever it is that I'm working on. Thinking about the character of a certain muscle. Is it rounded? Is it flat? Notice how much smoothing I'm doing in my work. You don't have to work like me, obviously. Whatever works for you, whatever is the most efficient and most effective way of describing forms for you is the correct way of working. But for me, I like to destroy my forms almost as soon as I've created them. So it's a continuous process of destruction and recreation. And in that way, I keep my forms fresh, but also stop my ego getting too attached to them. I'm never afraid to kill my forms. And one of the big problems I see in both in student work, but also in professionals, if I'm supervising, is a desire to want to hold on to what they've done. You need to be colder than that. If it's not working, it's not doing what it needs to do, then kill it. It's a weird thing that happens back here. It's almost, you almost never see it, but basically this oblique muscle, here it's grabbing hold of the bone, but also it's meeting the serratus muscle here, so you have muscle meeting muscle. And here you have a similar thing. The latissimus is not one straight line down there. It's like a jaggedy line like this. And what happens is the obliques meet the latissimus. So let me try and make that more clear. So latissimus would be doing something like that, and the obliques grab hold of the muscle. Rare example of hot muscle on muscle action as the obliques grab hold of the latissimus. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that because of that, the obliques couldn't be one straight line, even if they wanted to be. And there's a really important lesson there, that whatever the body type is, never trust lines that go on for too long without being broken. Talk a lot in general about lost and found line. that is finding it in sharp areas and then losing it. So you can see as I'm working on the serratus, I'm starting by carving in the form, and then I'm going to lose it, and then I'm going to carve it in again. I'm going to find it more sharply in areas and more softly in others. That's lost and found. And if you have a line that goes on too long without breaking, it's not a naturalistic line. Don't trust a line like that. It's not going to do you anything good. This is a muscle that I was looking at in the last video that I was saying isn't important, but here I am looking at for the second time, serratus posterior. Again, just to give me some of my unexpected details. Through here, things are feeling a bit too symmetrical, a bit too clean. Let's start to break that. Start to look for just some tension around the spine, maybe some skin down at the bottom of the back. Weirdly, at the base of the spine here, the skin is kind of glued to the body. Normally the skin slides over it, but because it gets glued here, you can start to find some wrinkles. You see that especially in old people. But here I'm just looking for it to make my forms feel less perfect. Symmetry in general is bad. If you're not lazy, then do all of your sculpts asymmetrically. Most of the time in production, we don't do that because of time constraints, and you want the topology to be symmetrical and whatever. But so then you kind of sculpt symmetrically, and then you fake the symmetry afterwards by just sculpting in by hand. It's always better to sculpt asymmetrically. Like you sculpt asymmetrically, but you try and make it symmetrical, and so you find accidental asymmetry, which is what you see in nature all the time. So you get a very naturalistic feel from that. Really all I'm doing is just going through each muscle, adding mass where the muscle is, but not where the tendon is. So if you were to study the deltoid carefully and properly, you would find that it's grabbing hold of the scapula, or the back portion grabs hold of the scapula there, but turns to tendon here. So that means that when you're dealing with muscular body types, you get a sudden drop, because every time a big muscle turns to tendon, you're going to get a sudden drop. Here, yeah, we do have the 3 separate portions of the deltoid, and if you look at the middle portion, it does this interesting kind of braiding effect where it's made up of all these separate parts. But just don't get too excited by the details, even on body types like this. Maybe when the mass is very, very tense, like if he had his arms raised, if he was lifting a heavy thing, then we can start to find that. But you kind of if you just if you in a relaxed or in a neutral pose, if you define all of your muscles to the max amount they can be defined, well, you're kind of blowing your load a bit early. Wish I could think of a better way to say that, but you kind of need to hold on to a little bit to be able to get that tension to read later on, Seeing if I can push that chest even more, because of course everyone likes to work the chest. And the glutes, finding that butterfly shape that I mentioned in the previous video, and now it becomes very, very defined. So here, it's an area where we transition to tendon and bone, so that place stays where it is, and then we just start to find the tension around there. Yeah, I'm going to go kind of hacky here and just hand sculpt in some variety in the abs. Nice little bit of salty tension in the belly button. And the pit of the neck. Because we have the serratus pushing this mass out through here, And so we say that the more you work that muscle, the wider you're going to get through there. What it results in is a kind of oval shape at the top. And then as these muscles here, the obliques, get very strong, they kind of flatten out. I'm actually going to accentuate that with a flattened brush. So most of us will be carrying fat through here, which is going to create a bit of roundedness. But if you have low percentage body fat and very strong obliques, that area gets flat. So this bottom area becomes basically a box. So you have a box and an oval on top, and that works pretty well for your strong muscular body type. And so this then feeds through into one of the key ideas of the previous video, which is whatever details that we're looking at, whatever details that we get excited by or carried away with, the key thing that always matters is the simplicity. And so, you know, even if I've got all of these little areas working really nicely and all these transitions are very beautiful and they feel very naturalistic, it counts for nothing if at a glance the big shape doesn't feel like a big muscular guy. So basically, if you don't have your sphere on top of a box, who cares whether you've got the obliques feeling just right or the serratus feeling just right or whatever it is. So everything always points back to simplicity, however deep we dive into the anatomy. Or in fact, the deeper we dive, the more we discover the simplicity. So that's probably all that we need to talk about for turning this body into a muscular body type. You can see, as always, it's not about the specific details. It's about what are we thinking about as we're working with these forms. So as I morph between what we have and what we had, you can see the bones have stayed exactly where they are, or where they haven't, it's just me screwing up. Or, in this case with the clavicles, we've introduced some muscle tension, lifting the clavicles up. So the bones all stay where they are. The transitions to bone become very strong. The transitions to tendon become very strong. And outside of that, we're just filling up the forms in the middle. So as long as we can understand the concepts of how to sell the idea of a muscular body type, then this works for us, whether we're sculpting a muscular human or animal or creature or whatever it is.